The letter trembled in Harriet Sullivan's hands as the laughter echoed through Boston's finest parlor. "Gentlemen, I present the successful conclusion of our wager that even a giant could be convinced she was lovable. She would never again measure her worth through another's eyes, even if it meant facing the wilderness alone. She just never expected that wilderness would include a ranch, a water war, and a solemn-eyed man whose letter had requested a bride of reasonable size. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world." Silas Thornton squinted at the rising sun as he worked the pump handle, the creak of metal punctuating the silence of his Wyoming ranch. 38 years of life had taught him that words were mostly unnecessary when a man lived alone. The water splashed into the bucket, clear, cold, and constant, unlike people. His gaze drifted to the empty chair on the porch. 3 months ago, he'd nearly died there, burning with fever for days, with no one to bring water or send for the doctor. The memory of that helplessness still burned worse than the fever had. Inside the cabin, his reflection caught in the small mirror, lines deepening around his eyes, beard more salt than pepper. Not that appearances mattered much out here, 20 miles from the nearest town, but the silence that had begun to gnaw at him like a wolf at bone. Silas pulled the letter from his pocket, its creases worn from repeated readings. The Boston marriage agency promised practical, God-fearing women seeking the opportunities of Western life. His own response had been equally practical: ranch established, house built, seeking hard-working wife of reasonable size and modest expectations. He folded the letter, wondering if Harriet Sullivan, seamstress of Boston, understood what she was traveling toward. No fancy shops, no theater, just work from dawn until dusk, and a man who'd forgotten how to make conversation. The calendar marked her expected arrival, 3 days hence. Silas surveyed his home with new eyes, the solid walls he'd built himself, the clean but plain furnishings, the shelf of books read repeatedly during winter storms. Would she find it sufficient? Would she find him sufficient? He moved methodically through the house, straightening what little needed straightening. The spare room waited with its fresh-planed bed frame and new mattress stuffed with clean straw. He'd hung curtains, an awkward endeavor that had cost him a bruised thumb and several curse words. As he stared at the newly swept floor, Rutherford Jenkins's words echoed in his memory. Selling would be simpler than trying to make a go of it alone. Thornton, my offer stands, for now. The neighboring rancher's empire grew with each bankrupt homesteader who surrendered to drought or hardship. The water rights to Thornton Creek were the only reason his modest ranch remained valuable. Without that creek, the land was worthless, a fact Jenkins surely knew. Silas folded his spare shirt carefully into the dresser drawer. He'd managed alone this long, but something had shifted during that fever, a recognition that solitude was a poor companion for the grave. He glanced once more at the letter before tucking it away. 3 days until the stagecoach arrived. 3 days until he'd know if Harriet Sullivan of Boston would find his offer acceptable, or if she'd take one look at his weathered face and silent ways and catch the next stage back east. The stagecoach rattled to a stop in a cloud of dust, spectators gathering like crows. Silas stood apart, hat in hand, aware of the whispers. Old Man Greeley had spread word about Thornton's mail-order bride faster than influenza. 5 passengers disembarked, a drummer with sample cases, a young couple, an elderly man. Silas's throat tightened. Perhaps she'd changed her mind. Then she appeared in the doorway, and conversation around him stuttered to silence. Harriet Sullivan stood nearly 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and solid. Her practical traveling dress tailored to accommodate her substantial frame. Her face was handsome rather than pretty, with intelligent eyes that surveyed the crowd before settling on him with unmistakable apprehension. "Well, Thornton," the driver called, "loud enough for all to hear. Looks like you ordered extra." Titters rippled through the onlookers. Something flickered in the woman's eyes, a dignified hurt she quickly masked. Silas recognized that look. He'd worn it himself when the town's eligible daughters found reasons to dance with anyone but the quiet rancher. "Miss Sullivan." Silas stepped forward, taking her carpetbag. "Welcome to Wyoming." He offered his arm, feeling her hesitation before she accepted it. Together, they walked through the parting crowd, the weight of stairs heavy on their backs. "Your journey was comfortable, I hope," he managed as they reached his wagon. "As comfortable as 2,000 miles can be," she answered, her Boston accent crisp against the western drawl surrounding them. "Though I confess the final miles were unexpectedly scrutinized." Silas helped her onto the wagon seat, noting the grace with which she moved despite her size. "Small towns thrive on novelty, Miss Sullivan, and I am certainly novel." A smile touched her lips, though it didn't reach her eyes. They rode in silence for several miles, the vastness of Wyoming spreading around them. Finally, Silas cleared his throat. "My ranch is modest but solid. The house has 2 bedrooms. I thought, that is, there's no obligation immediately. A trial period would be sensible." She turned to study him, her gaze direct. "A trial marriage, Mr. Thornton?" "A trial arrangement," he corrected. "If either of us finds it unsuitable, I'll pay your return fare." Relief softened her features. "That's more than fair." As the ranch came into view, the small cabin, the barn, the corral with 3 horses, Silas found himself seeing it through her eyes. Isolated, primitive compared to Boston. "The creek provides year-round water," he said, pointing to the silver ribbon cutting through his property. "Makes this land valuable. Water is life out here, I imagine," she observed. Silas nodded, surprised at her understanding. "It's everything." He helped her down, watching as she surveyed what might become her home. Her expression revealed nothing as he carried her trunk inside, but when she stepped through the doorway, her shoulders straightened with resolve. "Well, Mr. Thornton," she said, removing her gloves. "Shall we begin?" Dawn broke over the eastern ridge as Silas stepped onto the porch, surprised to find coffee already made. Through the window, he saw Harriet at the stove, her movements efficient despite the unfamiliar kitchen. "You're up early," he said, accepting the cup she offered. "Farm hours aren't so different from seamstress hours." She nodded toward his worn shirt. "I noticed some mending needed. I can see to it after breakfast." The domesticity felt foreign after years alone. "There's fence needs mending too. I'll see to that." In the barn. Silas gathered tools, thoughts circling back to the woman in his kitchen. 3 days she'd been here, and already the cabin felt different, organized, purposeful. She'd asked sensible questions about the ranch operations, showing neither complaint nor excessive enthusiasm. The broken fence post refused to budge, its weight awkward in his grip. As he strained, a shadow fell across him. "May I assist?" Harriet stood beside him, sleeves rolled up, practical skirt tied back. "This isn't women's work," he protested. "Neither is dying alone from stubbornness." She moved to the opposite side of the post. "On 3?" Together they hoisted the post into place, her strength matching his own. When it stood secure, she stepped back, brushing dirt from her hands. "My size has its advantages, Mr. Thornton." For the first time, Silas truly looked at her, not as an unexpected complication, but as a capable partner. "Silas," he corrected, "if we're testing this arrangement, we might as well use Christian names." "Harriet, then." She smiled briefly before pointing to the western fence line. "Those clouds suggest a storm. Should we secure anything?" The afternoon brought wind-driven rain that rattled the windows. Together they worked to shelter animals and equipment, moving with increasing coordination. When the chicken coop roof threatened to tear loose, Harriet held the ladder steady against the gale while Silas hammered it secure. Later, as they dried by the fire, Silas found himself studying her hands, strong, capable, yet unmistakably feminine in their precise movements as she mended his shirt. "You had a successful business in Boston?" he asked. "I did." Something shadowed her expression, until circumstances changed. Before he could inquire further, hoofbeats approached. Silas reached for his rifle, peering through the rain-streaked window. "Rutherford Jenkins," he muttered, recognizing the expensive coat. "Your neighbor?" "Nearest thing to it. Owns half the county and wants the rest." Silas set aside his rifle, but kept it close. "He's been especially interested in this land." Jenkins entered with a gust of wind, rainwater dripping from his hat onto Silas's clean floor. His assessing gaze lingered on Harriet before turning to Silas. "Thornton, thought I'd check if the storm damaged your creek access." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Seems you've found substantial help." Harriet rose to her full height, nearly matching Jenkins's. "Harriet Sullivan, Mr. Jenkins. Soon to be Thornton, conditions permitting." Jenkins's eyebrows rose. "Indeed. Well, conditions in Wyoming can be harsh for Eastern refinement. My offer to purchase this land stands. Thornton, should the arrangement prove unsuitable." Harriet followed Silas along the creek bank, basket balanced on her hip, 1 week into their trial, and already the ranch felt more familiar than strange. The rhythm of chores provided structure, and Silas's quiet company proved restful after Boston's social machinations. "The water's lower," Silas noted, frowning at the creek. "Shouldn't be, not with yesterday's rain. Could it be natural variation?" She set down her basket, watching him crouch to examine the flow. "No." His jaw tightened. "Something's wrong upstream." They followed the creek north, climbing the gentle rise that marked Silas's property line. At the crest, they stopped short, 20 yards beyond. Men worked with shovels and lumber, diverting water into a newly dug channel leading toward Jenkins's land. "Jenkins," Silas muttered, striding forward. The foreman spotted them first. "Thornton, this is Jenkins' property." "That water isn't." Silas pointed to the creek. "You're diverting my water rights." "Mr. Jenkins has documentation permitting irrigation improvements." The foreman's gaze shifted to Harriet, his expression turning mocking. "I see why you needed a workhorse instead of a wife." "Thornton." Harriet felt the familiar burn of humiliation, but Silas stepped forward, shoulders squared. "Apologize to Miss Sullivan," he said quietly. The men laughed. "Or what? Thornton." "You'll set your giant on us?" Silas's hand moved toward his gun, but Harriet touched his arm. "It's nothing I haven't heard before." The ride back was silent. Tension radiating from Silas at the cabin. He paced like a caged animal. "Jenkins is cutting off my water. Without it, this ranch is worthless." "Can you challenge him legally?" Harriet asked. "The territorial judge won't be through for months." He slammed his fist against the wall. "By then my cattle will be dying of thirst." Harriet hesitated, then spoke softly. "In Boston, a man humiliated me publicly. He courted me for months, then revealed it was a wager to see if anyone could love a woman of my size." The words still burned her throat. "My business collapsed after the scandal." Silas turned, truly seeing her for the first time. "That's why you came west." She nodded. "I came expecting rejection. What I didn't expect was someone willing to stand up for me. I know something about rejection." Silas sat heavily at the table. "My fiancée left me for the mercantile owner. Said she couldn't bear the loneliness out here." "Then you understand," Harriet said gently. "The worst pain isn't in being mocked. It's in having no one stand beside you when it happens." Something shifted in Silas's expression. He covered her hand with his weathered one. "We'll fight this, Harriet. Jenkins doesn't get to decide our worth." In that moment, with his palm warm against hers, their trial arrangement became something else entirely, an alliance against those who would diminish them. The Territorial Record Office smelled of dust and leather bindings. Silas traced his finger along the water rights document, while Harriet noted the coordinates on a rough map. "There," he tapped the page. "Creek rights established with my homestead claim in '79. Jenkins' diversion violates territorial statute." Harriet nodded, adding the citation to their growing evidence. Working together over the past 2 weeks had created an easy rhythm between them, his knowledge of land matters complementing her meticulous organization. "We should visit the Hendersons next," she suggested. "Their water comes from the same creek." "You're getting comfortable on a horse," Silas observed as they rode out that afternoon. Harriet laughed. "Necessity is a demanding teacher." The neighboring homesteads told similar stories, water mysteriously diminishing, followed by visits from Jenkins offering to buy their failing ranches. Each family welcomed Harriet with increasing warmth as word spread of her confrontation with Jenkins' men. "You've got spine, Mrs. Thornton," old Mrs. Henderson declared, pressing preserves into Harriet's hands. "Miss Sullivan still," Harriet corrected gently. The woman's eyes twinkled. "For now, perhaps." Riding home through the golden evening light, Silas cleared his throat. "About that." "About what?" Harriet asked. "The Miss Sullivan part." He kept his eyes on the trail ahead. "Our arrangement. It's been nearly a month." Her heart quickened. "Has it been unsatisfactory?" "Quite the opposite." He finally looked at her. "I find myself hoping you might consider making it permanent." The town appeared ahead, strangely busy for a weekday. As they approached, the reason became clear. Jenkins stood on the general store porch addressing a crowd, his voice carrying, "Peculiar arrangement. Thornton's desperation has clouded his judgment about what constitutes a proper wife." Laughter followed. Harriet felt the familiar heat of shame, but Silas guided his horse directly to the gathering. Conversation hushed as they approached. "Jenkins," Silas called, his voice stronger than Harriet had ever heard it. "I understand you've been concerning yourself with my private affairs." The rancher turned, feigning surprise, merely expressing concern for Miss Sullivan's welfare in such an isolated location. "My welfare has never been better," Harriet replied, dismounting to stand beside Silas, "unlike the welfare of ranchers whose water mysteriously disappears before they receive your purchase offers." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Jenkins' smile thinned. "Careful with accusations, Miss." "Mrs. Thornton?" "Actually," Silas said, taking Harriet's hand, "if she'll have me." The question hung between them, more vulnerable than any words they'd shared. Harriet searched his face. finding not resignation, but certainty. "I believe I will, Mr. Thornton," she answered, squeezing his hand. Later, alone on the porch beneath Wyoming stars, his kiss tasted of promise and defiance, the perfect beginning to a union formed not from desperation, but from the recognition of matching strength. Judge Parker's eyebrows rose steadily as he reviewed the documentation spread across his desk. "This is thorough work, Mr. and Mrs. Thornton." Harriet felt a thrill at the new address. Their wedding 3 days prior had been simple, a brief ceremony at the territorial office, witnessed by the Hendersons. The plain gold band on her finger still felt foreign, but the certainty in Silas's eyes when he'd spoken his vows had banished any doubts. "The water rights are clear," Silas explained. "Jenkins's diversion is illegal." Indeed, the judge signed an injunction. "This orders immediate removal of the diversion. I'll have my deputy deliver it today." They rode home in shared triumph, planning improvements now that their ranch's future seemed secure. The summer sunset painted the landscape gold as they crested the final rise toward home. Harriet saw the smoke first. "Silas!" He spurred his horse forward, Harriet close behind. The barn blazed against the darkening sky, flames reaching hungrily toward the house. 2 mounted figures spurred away toward Jenkins's land. "The animals!" Harriet cried, dismounting before her horse fully stopped. Together, they worked frantically, Silas breaking the corral gate while Harriet led panicked horses to safety. When the roof collapsed in a shower of sparks, they stood back, faces streaked with soot and sweat. "Jenkins," Silas growled. "We can't prove it," Harriet reminded him, though she knew it as surely as her own name. A rifle shot cracked the night. Splinters flew from the fence post beside Silas. "Inside," he shouted, pulling Harriet toward the cabin. They barely reached the porch when 2 riders emerged from the shadows. Silas pushed Harriet behind him, drawing his pistol. Thornton Jenkins's voice called, "This could have been a simple business transaction. Now it's become complicated." A second shot struck the porch support. Silas returned fire, pulling Harriet through the doorway. Inside, he pressed his rifle into her hands. "Can you shoot?" "I can learn quickly," she answered, accepting the weapon. A crash came from the back window. Silas rushed toward the sound as a figure lunged through the broken glass. Harriet watched in horror as the intruder tackled Silas, a knife glinting. Without hesitation, she seized the heavy oak chair beside her and brought it down on the attacker's back. The man crumpled, allowing Silas to scramble free. Jenkins appeared in the doorway, his own pistol aimed at Silas. "I tried to be reasonable." Harriet stepped between them, her substantial frame shielding Silas completely. "Mrs. Thornton," Jenkins sneered. "Surely you recognize when you're outmatched." Hoofbeats approached, many horses, moving fast. Jenkins' expression faltered as lanterns appeared on the ridge. The Hendersons, the Millers, every neighboring rancher whose water Jenkins had threatened. "I believe," Harriet said calmly, "it is you who are outmatched, Mr. Jenkins." The territorial courthouse buzzed with whispers as Rutherford Jenkins stood before Judge Parker, his expensive suit incongruous with the shackles at his wrists. "The charges are water rights violation, arson, attempted murder, and criminal conspiracy," the judge read. "How do you plead?" Jenkins's lawyer stepped forward with technical objections, but Harriet barely heard them. Her attention remained on Silas, whose testimony had been delivered with quiet dignity that morning. The man who had once avoided town now stood his ground before the entire community. The evidence had been overwhelming. Jenkins' foreman had confessed to the diversion scheme and the barn burning after the neighboring ranchers had captured him fleeing the Thornton property. Outside, after the judge ordered Jenkins held for trial, the community gathered around them with offers of help rebuilding the barn. "We start tomorrow," old Henderson declared. "Bring your crews at dawn." Silas shook hands solemnly with each man, thanking them with few but heartfelt words. Harriet watched this transformation with pride. Her husband, no longer isolated, had found his place in this community. The following weeks passed in a blur of activity. The barn rose quickly with so many hands at work. Women brought food while men raised beams, creating a structure larger and sturdier than before. "There's something I need to show you," Harriet told Silas one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset paint the new barn red gold. She retrieved a packet of letters from her trunk, correspondence from her aunt to a childhood friend who had settled in Wyoming territory. "My aunt's friend left her a parcel of land," Harriet explained, spreading out the deed. "I inherited it after my aunt passed. I never told you because you weren't sure you'd stay." Silas finished gently. She nodded. "The land adjoins yours to the north, that rise beyond the creek." Silas studied the document, then looked up with wondering eyes. "Harriet, that's where the spring feeds into the creek. Jenkins wanted that land desperately. It controls the water source." The harvest dance transformed the town hall into a warm, lamp-lit haven against the autumn chill. Harriet hesitated at the entrance, memories of Boston mockery still fresh. "Second thoughts?" Silas asked softly. "Old habits," she admitted. He offered his arm. "Mrs. Thornton, may I have this dance?" On the floor, she discovered he had been practicing, despite their difference in height. He led with confident steps that accommodated her stature perfectly. Around them, neighbors nodded approval at the couple who had stood against Jenkins and won. "I've been thinking," Silas said as they turned together, "about what truly matters in measuring a life." "And what's your conclusion, Mr. Thornton?" His eyes held hers, no longer guarded but full of certainty. "That the true measure of a man isn't found in acres owned or battles won, but in choosing the right partner to face those battles beside him." Harriet's heart swelled as they moved in perfect harmony. Two people, once defined by their differences, now perfectly matched in the eyes of their community and, most importantly, in each other's eyes. In life's vast frontier, we often build fences around our hearts, believing isolation protects us from pain. Yet this story reminds us that true strength emerges not from standing alone, but from the courage to be seen completely, with all our differences and imperfections, and to be accepted nonetheless. When society measures worth by appearance or convention, the most revolutionary act is to value someone for exactly who they are, not who others expect them to be. The barriers we face, whether physical differences, social prejudice, or past wounds, become insignificant when met with authentic connection. Perhaps the deepest wisdom lies in recognizing that our perceived flaws often become our greatest strengths when placed in the right context. What the world mocks as too much or not enough may be precisely what someone else needs. In community, our individual limitations transform into collective resilience. The very qualities that once made us outcasts become the foundation of belonging. This is the alchemy of genuine love. It doesn't merely accept differences, it celebrates them as essential components of a stronger whole. Thank you for joining us for today's story of unlikely love and courageous standing. If this tale of seeing beyond appearances resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the transformative power of connection. Until next time, remember that the true measure of a heart is found in its capacity to love beyond boundaries.